The rejection came before the elevator doors had even closed. One moment, Rylan Mercer was standing in the polished lobby of the tallest office tower in the city, holding the worn leather folder that contained the last copies of his resume. The next, he was staring through the glass entrance at the bright morning sunlight, wondering how he would explain to his 8-year-old daughter that once again, life had chosen someone else. He had walked into the building carrying hope, but he walked out carrying only silence. What Rylan didn't know was that less than 3 minutes later, the billionaire CEO himself would burst out of the executive floor, sprint through the lobby, and chase after the man everyone else had already forgotten. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness, honesty, and second chances can change a person's life, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Lifeline Tales. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories that remind the world humanity still exists. The city was glowing beneath a gentle blue sky, and warm sunlight reflected from the glass buildings that surrounded the financial district. Rylan walked slowly along the sidewalk, his shoulders heavy from years of carrying burdens no one else could see. At only 34, he looked much older. Sleepless nights, endless bills, and the responsibility of raising his daughter alone had quietly carved lines into his face. Ever since losing his wife, Mara, to a sudden illness 4 years earlier, every decision in his life had revolved around keeping little Nora safe, fed, and smiling. There had been no luxury of grief because survival had demanded all his attention. He had worked construction, delivered groceries, driven trucks through the night, and accepted any honest job that kept food on their small kitchen table. But when the company he worked for shut down unexpectedly, the savings disappeared almost overnight. The interview that morning had been his greatest opportunity in months. Ardent Global Holdings had announced a position overseeing logistics operations, a role perfectly suited to Rylan's years of practical experience. He had spent days preparing, borrowing a pressed shirt from his neighbor and polishing shoes that had seen better years. He believed experience would speak louder than expensive suits. Instead, the interview panel had focused on his employment gaps, his lack of a prestigious degree, and the fact that his references came from ordinary working people rather than executives. They thanked him politely, smiled professionally, and moved on to the next candidate before he had even finished explaining why his work history looked so unusual. As Rylan crossed the street, he refused to look back at the towering building. Hope hurt more than disappointment because hope always made disappointment feel personal. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Nora's school reminding parents about the upcoming science fair. She had been talking excitedly about building a small model windmill from recycled materials. Rylan smiled despite everything. Somehow, no matter how difficult life became, his daughter still found reasons to dream. Inside the executive conference room, Billionaire CEO Aldrich Vaughn was reviewing the morning's hiring reports. Unlike many corporate leaders, Aldrich insisted on personally reading the final recommendations for management positions. Years earlier, when he had inherited the company from his father, he promised himself that talent would never be judged solely by appearances. While scanning the interview summaries, one file immediately caught his attention. It belonged to Rylan Mercer. Attached to the resume was an internal note stating that the candidate lacked executive polish and was therefore not recommended. But another document, accidentally uploaded with the file, was a handwritten recommendation from the owner of a small transport company. The letter described Rylan as the most dependable employee he had ever known, explaining how he had once continued working 12-hour shifts while secretly spending every evening at the hospital beside his dying wife. It mentioned that Rylan had refused donations, choosing instead to earn every dollar honestly while caring for his child. The final sentence stopped Aldrich completely. It simply read that some people manage businesses, but very few manage to keep their humanity through unimaginable hardship. Aldrich immediately asked where the candidate was. The hiring director casually replied that the interview had ended several minutes earlier and that the applicant had already left the building. Without another word, the billionaire stood so quickly that his chair rolled backward. To the astonishment of every executive in the room, he hurried out, ignored the waiting elevator by taking the emergency stairs, rushed through the lobby, and ran into the street searching for a man no one else believed mattered. Several blocks away, Rylan sat alone on a public bench beneath a row of blooming trees. The sunshine felt strangely comforting despite the uncertainty hanging over him. He opened his lunchbox, which contained only a homemade sandwich prepared before dawn. Halfway through eating, he noticed an expensive black car stop beside the park. He assumed someone important had arrived for a nearby meeting and paid little attention until a sharply dressed man stepped out and walked directly toward him. Aldrich recognized the tired eyes from the interview photograph. Up close, he saw something the interview panel had completely overlooked. He saw quiet determination instead of defeat. He saw dignity instead of desperation. Most importantly, he saw a father trying not to let life harden his heart. Rather than discussing resumes or qualifications, Aldrich simply sat beside Rylan on the bench. The city moved around them while both men remained silent for a moment. The billionaire observed the carefully folded lunch napkin, the repaired backpack, and the faded photograph peeking from Rylan's wallet. Everything reflected responsibility rather than poverty. As they talked, Aldrich learned that every career decision Rylan had made was shaped by one goal: never allowing Nora to feel abandoned after losing her mother. Better-paying jobs had often required constant travel, but he repeatedly chose lower-paying local work so he could attend school events, help with homework, and read bedtime stories. Promotions had been sacrificed for parent-teacher meetings. Overtime had been declined whenever his daughter became sick. To many employers, those choices suggested limited ambition. To Aldrich, they revealed extraordinary priorities. The billionaire quietly admitted that the interview committee had focused on credentials while ignoring character. Businesses could train people to operate software and manage systems, but integrity, compassion, and resilience could never be taught inside a conference room. Those qualities were earned through life's hardest moments. Back at headquarters, executives were shocked when Aldrich returned with Rylan walking beside him. Employees whispered throughout the building, wondering why the rejected applicant had suddenly entered through the executive elevator. Instead of taking him to human resources, Aldrich invited him into the largest conference room, where department heads had already gathered. There, Aldrich did something no one expected. He explained that leadership was not measured by expensive education alone but by the ability to remain dependable when life became unfair. He pointed toward Rylan and shared only a few details from the handwritten recommendation. The room fell silent as people realized they had judged a resume instead of a human being. Rather than offering sympathy, Aldrich offered responsibility. Rylan was invited to join the company, not as an act of charity, but because the CEO believed the organization desperately needed leaders who understood ordinary families. His starting position came with fair pay, health insurance, flexible hours for parenting responsibilities, and a clear path toward management based on performance instead of appearances. For several seconds, Rylan could barely process what was happening. He had entered the building believing he wasn't good enough. Now the company's highest leader was placing trust in him before he had even worked a single day. Gratitude filled his eyes, not because someone wealthy had rescued him, but because someone had finally looked beyond the surface. Months passed beneath bright skies filled with possibility. Rylan arrived early every morning and became known for solving problems others ignored. He treated warehouse staff with the same respect he showed executives. Whenever mistakes happened, he accepted responsibility instead of assigning blame. Slowly, the culture around him began to change. Employees felt heard. Productivity increased naturally because people wanted to work alongside someone who valued every individual. At home, life transformed just as beautifully. Nora completed her science fair project using recycled materials gathered together with her father during sunny weekend walks. She proudly won the school's Creativity Award, not because her project was the most expensive, but because it reflected imagination and perseverance. Watching her smile from the audience, Rylan realized success wasn't defined by wealth. Success meant being present for the moments that truly mattered. One afternoon, Aldrich quietly attended the school's award ceremony without announcing who he was. Standing among ordinary parents beneath the warm daylight, he watched Rylan cheer louder than anyone else as Nora accepted her certificate. In that simple moment, the billionaire understood that he had not merely hired an employee. He had restored hope to a family that refused to surrender. Years later, Ardent Global Holdings became known nationwide for its people-first hiring philosophy. Applicants were evaluated not only by academic achievements but also by resilience, honesty, and community impact. Other companies criticized the approach at first, but many eventually adopted similar practices after seeing extraordinary results. What began with one rejected single father gradually changed thousands of lives. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends and family, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Lifeline Tales. Your support allows inspiring stories like this to reach people who may need hope today.